The man who was supposed to save Burkina Faso is now its convicted traitor. Paul-Henri Damiba, exiled and condemned, just became a weapon in a war his successor is waging from within. But the treason verdict you already know about isn't the story. The story is what happened in the 72 hours after the gavel fell. 3 colonels, 1 intelligence chief, and a commander from the Northern Front. All gone. Not captured by jihadists. Arrested by their own government. And here's the part that should terrify you. 2 of them were scheduled to lead operations this week against Al-Qaeda positions. Their troops are still in the field. Their replacements have never commanded a battalion in combat. You're about to understand why military insiders are whispering that Captain Traoré might just have won the legal battle while losing the only war that actually matters. The gavel comes down in a Ouagadougou military tribunal, and a former president of Burkina Faso is condemned in absentia for treason. Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the man who seized power in a coup just 18 months ago, is now a convicted enemy of the state he once commanded. But this isn't the end of a story. It is the detonation chord for the next, far more volatile chapter. Within hours of the sentence, the ground in Burkina Faso begins to shift. It's not public protests that ripple out from the courtroom, but something far more dangerous in a nation held together by the loyalty of its armed forces. A silent, accelerated purge. Arrests, dismissals, sudden, unexplained reassignments. The machinery of the Burkinabe military is being taken apart bolt by bolt and put back together by a man who trusts almost no one. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just consolidating power. He is conducting open-heart surgery on an army that is also the country's last line of defense against a catastrophic insurgency. And he is doing it on a battlefield. This is the inside story of a nation purging itself from within, the ticking clock of a potential mutiny, and the high-stakes question that will define the Sahel. Is this a decisive move to secure sovereignty, or the fracturing of command right when cohesion matters most? To understand why a treason conviction in a Ouagadougou courtroom sends shockwaves through every barracks and forward operating base in the country, you have to understand the precarious throne that Captain Ibrahim Traoré sits upon. He is not an elected leader with a popular mandate. He is not a veteran strongman with decades of networks binding the elite to him. He is a young captain who came to power on a wave of frustration and fury, a military officer who rode the discontent of his peers all the way to the presidential palace. His legitimacy is rooted in a single powerful promise: to do what his predecessors could not, secure the nation. But the path to that promise is now littered with the careers and, potentially, the lives of those he views as obstacles. The conviction of Damiba is the legal exclamation point on a political reality. There is no room for the old guard. There is no room for ambiguity. And in a system where the military is both the government and the governed, that kind of zero-sum logic creates shockwaves. Let's look at what the conviction itself signifies. Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba isn't just a former leader. He's a symbol of a broken promise. He led the January 2022 coup that ousted elected President Roch Kabore, justified by the same refrain that brought Traoré to power: the failure to contain the jihadist insurgency. Damiba was supposed to be the answer. He lasted 8 months. In September 2022, Traoré and his faction of junior officers pushed Damiba out, accusing him of the very same failures and of harboring intentions to rely on foreign military solutions, namely from France, rather than seeking true sovereignty. For months, Damiba has been in exile, primarily in Togo, a ghost haunting the Traoré regime. The treason charge is the regime's way of exorcising that ghost, of branding him not just a failed leader, but a traitor to the very idea of Burkina Faso. It's a message, and it's a message aimed squarely at the thousands of men and women still in uniform who might have felt a lingering loyalty to the old chain of command. It says loyalty to the past is now a crime. But the courtroom drama is merely the public face of a much deeper and more turbulent process unfolding behind the barracks walls. The treason conviction served as the justification, the green light, for an internal security operation that has been quietly brewing for months. This is the purge, and it's not subtle. reports filtering out of Ouagadougou and other military hubs speak of a systematic dismantling of networks. Officers who served under Damiba, who were appointed by him, or who are simply suspected of having divided loyalties, are being swept aside. Some are arrested, detained without clear charge, and questioned by the intelligence services. Others are simply dismissed. Their careers ended with a signature. But the most destabilizing tactic in the context of a counterinsurgency is the sudden reassignment. A commander who has spent 2 years building relationships with local communities and understanding the terrain of a specific volatile region might receive orders overnight to report to a desk job in the capital or to a quiet garrison in the far west. It looks like standard military procedure on paper. In reality, it's a way of severing connections, isolating potential rivals, and inserting loyalists into positions of operational control. This is where the stakes become terrifyingly clear. Burkina Faso is not a stable nation conducting routine administrative updates. It is a country fighting for its survival. Vast swaths of its territory are ungoverned, plagued by affiliates of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The Burkinabe armed forces, already stretched thin and demoralized by years of losses, are the only thing standing between the state and total collapse. They are engaged in a brutal, grinding war where unit cohesion, trust between officers and men, and intimate knowledge of a local landscape can mean the difference between a successful patrol and a massacre. Into this cauldron, Captain Traoré has poured the solvent of a purge. Removing a commander from a frontline unit isn't like swapping out a corporate manager. It creates a vacuum of knowledge. It breaks the trust between soldiers who have bled together and a new leader sent from the capital whose primary qualification is political reliability, not combat experience. It breeds suspicion. When a soldier doesn't know if his lieutenant is listening for enemy radio chatter or for signs of political disloyalty, the mission fractures from within. You'll see why this moment matters when you consider the specific accusations leveled against the networks being dismantled. The regime speaks of foreign alignment. In the context of Captain Traoré's Burkina Faso, that phrase has a sharp, unambiguous edge. It means France. Since taking power, Traoré has orchestrated a dramatic break with Burkina Faso's former colonial power. He expelled French special forces, forced the closure of the French embassy's military mission, and pivoted decisively toward new partners, most notably Russia. The presence of Russian military instructors, often ambiguously linked to the Africa Corps, the successor entity to the Wagner Group, is now a reality in the country. For the Traoré government, foreign alignment is a euphemism for those within the military who still believe in the old alliances, who might question the wisdom of trading French support for Russian patronage, or who maintain professional contacts with their former French counterparts. The purge, therefore, is not just about loyalty to Damiba. It's about loyalty to a geopolitical vision. It's about erasing any faction within the officer corps that might act as a bridge back to Paris, or that might resist the Kremlin-aligned path the junta has chosen. But this internal cleansing creates a dangerous paradox. By purging officers with Western ties, the regime is betting everything on its new partners. Yet, those new partners, the Russian instructors, are not a conventional army. Their role is often advisory, and their numbers are limited. They provide a veneer of strategic support and, crucially, the political backing of a UN Security Council veto power. But they are not a substitute for a coherent, unified, and experienced Burkinabe officer corps. The men being sidelined are precisely the ones with years of training, with battle-hardened experience, and with the institutional memory of how the Burkinabe army operates. In their place, Traoré is elevating younger, more ideologically aligned officers. These are men who share his vision of total sovereignty, who are untainted by association with France. But they are also, in many cases, less experienced. They are being thrust into command positions in the middle of a war, expected to learn on the job while the enemy watches. This is the gamble. That revolutionary zeal and loyalty can outweigh years of hard-won tactical knowledge. Is that a strategic move or the start of a larger shift toward incompetence at the top? The whispers of unrest and quiet resistance that follow the reports of the Purge are not just journalistic speculation. They are the logical consequence of this internal war. The military is a reflection of the society it protects, and Burkinabe society is deeply multi-layered, with ethnic, regional, and familial ties that often transcend political factions. When a senior officer from a particular ethnic group or region is arrested or dismissed, it doesn't just affect him. It sends a signal of distrust to every soldier from that community. Networks of solidarity, built over decades in the barracks, begin to fray. Whispers turn into conversations. Conversations in the mess hall turn into encrypted messages on phones. Loyalty to the nation and loyalty to a commander who has just been branded a traitor become agonizingly tangled. This is the breeding ground for a mutiny. Not a grand orchestrated plot, but a spontaneous combustion born of fear and resentment. A unit in the field might refuse orders if they believe their commander was purged unjustly. A garrison in the capital might become restive if they see their comrades arrested. The regime knows this, and their response to the fear of unrest is to purge even more aggressively, creating a vicious cycle where the cure for disloyalty may actually be the cause of the rebellion they fear most. To the outside observer, the conviction of a deposed leader might seem like a settled matter. A man is guilty. He is in exile. The case is closed. But inside the corridors of power in Ouagadougou, the case is just the opening move in a high-stakes chess game against internal enemies. Captain Traoré and his inner circle are not naive. They understand the risks of the purge. They understand that they are walking a tightrope over a chasm of potential military anarchy. So why do it? The answer lies in their analysis of the past. They look at the history of Burkina Faso, and indeed the entire Sahel region, and they see a pattern. Coups within coups, leaders overthrown by their own subordinates. They believe that Damiba's downfall wasn't just about his failure on the battlefield, but about the entrenched, corrupt, and foreign-aligned networks he protected. For Traoré, leaving those networks intact would be signing his own death warrant. The purge, from his perspective, is not a paranoid overreaction. It is a preemptive counterattack. It is the necessary surgery to excise a cancer that has already killed 2 governments in a single year. He is not just trying to win a war against jihadists. He is trying to win a war against the very nature of Sahelian military politics, where loyalty is fleeting and every comrade is a potential rival. But this internal security campaign is colliding violently with the external security crisis. The jihadist groups controlling the countryside are sophisticated actors. They monitor Burkinabe radio, they have informants, and they understand the psychology of their enemy. They can see the turmoil within the armed forces. A purge that pulls commanders from the field, that disrupts supply lines, that creates suspicion between units. This is an intelligence windfall for the insurgents. They can exploit the gaps in coverage left by reassigned troops. They can target units led by inexperienced, politically appointed commanders, knowing they are more vulnerable. They can amplify propaganda about the government turning on its own soldiers, seeking to persuade weary government troops to lay down their arms, or, worse, to defect. The greatest danger of the purge is not that it will spark a mutiny in the capital tomorrow. The greatest danger is that it will lead to a series of tactical defeats in the bush, day after day, week after week, until the military's front line collapses and the insurgents are at the gates of the major cities. The enemy doesn't need to fire a shot in Ouagadougou. They just need the Burkinabe army to fire on itself. The regional implications of this internal fragility are immense. Burkina Faso sits at the heart of the Sahel, a pivot point between the coastal states of West Africa and the desert expanses to the north. Its neighbors Mali and Niger are also ruled by military juntas that have broken with Western powers and embraced Russian support. These 3 nations, the alliance of Sahel states, have formed a mutual defense pact, a shield against potential external intervention, particularly from the regional bloc ECOWAS. On paper, this alliance presents a united front, a new axis of sovereignty stretching across the Sahel. But an alliance is only as strong as its weakest link. If Burkina Faso's military begins to fracture from within, if command cohesion dissolves into mutiny and infighting, the entire defense architecture of the region is compromised. Mali and Niger, themselves grappling with brutal insurgencies, would lose their southern buffer. The porous borders between the three countries would become highways for jihadist movements to exploit the chaos. The dream of a sovereign, united front against terrorism could crumble, replaced by a landscape of failed states, each consumed by its own internal demons. What happens next could redefine the region. The international community, particularly France and its allies, watches the situation with a mixture of concern and, perhaps, a quiet sense of vindication. They have long argued that the junta's promises of improved security are hollow, and that the turn away from Western military cooperation would lead to chaos. The purges in Burkina Faso feed that narrative. But the West has little leverage left. Its ambassadors are sidelined, its troops are gone, and its influence has been replaced by Russian political cover and information operations that portray any internal dissent as a foreign plot. For Moscow, the situation is a delicate one. They have hitched their wagon to Captain Traoré's star. They are providing training, limited equipment, and, crucially, the rhetorical framework of anti-imperialist struggle. But if Traoré's government falls to a mutiny, or if his army collapses on the battlefield, Russia loses a key partner, and its prestige in the region takes a severe blow. They cannot afford to be seen as backing losers. The Kremlin's advisors are likely urging the junta to balance its security concerns, to avoid a purge so broad that it destroys the very army it needs to win. But the dynamic of revolutionary paranoia is a difficult force for even seasoned Russian political technologists to control. And what of a man at the center of the storm, Captain Ibrahim Traoré? He is, by many accounts, a true believer. At just over 30 years old, he represents a new generation of African military officers who have known nothing but the forever war against terrorism. They are disillusioned with the old elites, furious at the perceived failures of the West to provide genuine security, and convinced that the only path forward is radical, uncompromising sovereignty. Traoré has cultivated an image of a humble, revolutionary soldier, living modestly, mingling with troops. But the pressures of leadership are now bearing down on him with incredible force. The treason conviction was a political victory, but it opened the door to a military crisis. He must now decide how far the purge will go. Will he be satisfied with dismantling the top echelons of the Damiba network, or will his security services continue to turn the screws, digging deeper and deeper until they have rooted out every perceived dissident? The answer to that question will determine whether Burkina Faso emerges from this period with a lean, ideologically pure, but inexperienced fighting force, or whether it tears itself apart in a frenzy of suspicion. The next few weeks will be critical. The soldiers being arrested or reassigned are not passive victims. They have their own networks, their own loyalties, and, in some cases, their own weapons. The potential for a counterstrike, for a group of disaffected officers to preempt their own arrest by seizing a military base or declaring a mutiny, is a very real and present danger. The government's intelligence services are working overtime to monitor these networks, to identify the plotters before they can act. But in an environment where trust has evaporated, intelligence becomes a weapon of rumor and counter-rumor. A tip about a planned mutiny might be genuine, or it might be a plant designed to make the government arrest a loyal officer, clearing the way for a real conspiracy. This is the fog of internal war, and navigating it requires a steady hand and a cool head. Captain Traoré has shown he possesses the ruthlessness to seize power and the political will to purge his enemies. He has yet to show he possesses the strategic patience to manage the blowback. The situation is further complicated by the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding alongside the political drama. Nearly 2 million Burkinabe are internally displaced, fleeing the violence in the countryside for the relative safety of towns and cities controlled by the government. These are the people the army is sworn to protect. They huddle in camps, dependent on aid, their lives on hold. For them, the power struggles in Ouagadougou are a distant, abstract noise. Their concern is whether the army patrols will keep the jihadists from overrunning their camp. The purge and the potential for military infighting it creates is a direct threat to their already precarious existence. If the army fractures, if units turn on each other instead of fighting the common enemy, the protection afforded to these vulnerable populations will evaporate. The jihadists are waiting. They have shown time and again their ability to exploit power vacuums. A military distracted by internal feuds is an invitation for them to expand their control, to seize more territory, and to tighten their brutal grip on the populations that remain. This is the core tragedy of the current moment. Burkina Faso, a nation with a proud history of resistance and a vibrant youthful population, is being consumed by a perfect storm of external threats and internal convulsions. The treason conviction of Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba was not a moment of closure. It was a moment of escalation. It has accelerated a process of internal cleansing that was already underway, turning the military's focus inward at the exact moment it most needs to focus outward. Captain Traoré's supporters will argue that this is the painful but necessary price of true sovereignty, that only by cutting out the rot can a healthy, loyal, and effective fighting force emerge. They will point to the failures of the past, to the corruption and foreign dependence that led Burkina Faso to the brink, and argue that the old ways are dead. The critics, however, see a different path, a nation descending into a paranoid spiral, destroying its own defenses, and playing into the hands of an enemy that thrives on chaos and division. As the sun sets over the Sahel, the barracks in Ouagadougou are quiet, but it is the quiet of a held breath, not of peace. Behind the closed doors, in the encrypted messages, and in the whispered conversations among soldiers, the future of Burkina Faso is being contested. The treason verdict has been delivered. The purge is underway. The question that hangs in the hot, dusty air is not whether there will be a reaction, but what form it will take. Will it be a coordinated mutiny, led by senior officers who feel they have no choice but to strike first? Will it be a slow bleed, a steady erosion of capability that leads to battlefield defeats and the eventual collapse of the state's defenses? Or will Captain Traoré's gamble pay off, forging a leaner, meaner, and utterly loyal fighting force capable of turning the tide against the insurgency and securing the nation's sovereignty once and for all? The answer will not only decide the fate of one man or one junta. It will determine whether the alliance of Sahel states is a viable alternative to the old regional order, or a paper tiger destined to collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions. It will send a signal to capitals from Paris to Moscow about the viability of the new axis of power in West Africa. And most importantly, it will decide the fate of millions of Burkinabe, trapped between a brutal insurgency and an army that is now looking over its shoulder as much as it is looking at the enemy. The purge is a gamble, a roll of the dice on the idea that security can be built on a foundation of ideological purity and absolute loyalty. The stakes could not be higher. The margin for error could not be smaller. And in the shadows of the Sahel, the enemy is watching, waiting for the Burkinabe army to make the first fatal mistake against itself. The treason conviction of Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba was never the end of a chapter. It was the spark thrown into a powder keg. And now, as the dust settles over the Ouagadougou courtroom, the real detonations are happening in the shadows, in the barracks, the forward operating bases, and the encrypted messaging apps, where soldiers whisper about who will be next. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has made his choice. He is betting everything on the idea that loyalty matters more than experience, that ideological purity can replace hard-won tactical knowledge, and that purging the old guard is the only path to victory. But war does not care about political loyalties. The jihadists controlling the countryside do not ask whether a commander was appointed by Damiba or Traoré before they ambush his patrol. They only see weakness. They only exploit gaps. And right now, the Burkinabe military is creating gaps with every arrest, every dismissal, every sudden reassignment. The question that now hangs over the Sahel is whether this purge will forge a leaner, more effective fighting force, or whether it will fracture the army at the exact moment cohesion matters most. The regional implications are staggering. If Burkina Faso's military begins to turn on itself, the entire alliance of Sahel states is compromised. Mali and Niger lose their southern buffer. The porous borders become highways for insurgents. The dream of a sovereign, united front against terrorism crumbles into the nightmare of three failing states, each consumed by internal demons, while the enemy watches and waits. For the nearly 2 million displaced Burkinabe huddled in camps, this is not abstract geopolitics. This is survival. Their lives depend on an army that can hold the line. And that army is now looking over its shoulder as much as it is watching the horizon. What happens next will define not just Burkina Faso, but the entire region. Is this the painful surgery needed to save the patient? Or is it the patient bleeding out on the table? The enemy is already placing its bets. And in the shadows of the Sahel, they are waiting for their answer.